Dr. Velterra stepped off the transport ship and onto the human research station called New Haven. She carried her scanning equipment in one hand and her data pad in the other. Her mission was simple: study how humans behaved around other species and write a report for the Galactic Research Consortium. She had studied dozens of alien species before. Most followed predictable patterns. They formed partnerships for protection, traded resources, or kept other creatures for food. It was all very logical and easy to understand. The first corridor she walked down was clean and well-lit. Human voices echoed from nearby rooms, along with the hum of machinery. Everything seemed normal until she heard something that made her stop in her tracks. "There you go, Squishy," a gentle voice said. "Drink up, little guy." Velterra turned the corner and froze. A human male was sitting on the floor, cradling something in his arms. Her scanner immediately began beeping in alarm. The readings showed extremely high toxin levels, enough to kill most known life forms in minutes. The human was holding a Kepler slug. Velterra had studied these creatures before. They were among the most venomous beings in the galaxy. Their skin secreted poisons that could dissolve metal. Yet this human was bottle-feeding it like it was harmless. "Oh, hello there," the human said, noticing her. He had brown hair and kind eyes. "I'm Jake. You must be the researcher we were expecting." Velterra stared at him, then at the deadly creature in his arms. That is a Class 7 venomous organism," she managed to say. Jake looked down at the slug and smiled. "This is Squishy. We found him hurt in an asteroid field about 3 months ago. Poor little guy was all alone and bleeding. We couldn't just leave him there." The alien biologist watched in horror as Jake gently stroked the creature's toxic skin. According to her knowledge, he should have been dead already. Instead, the slug seemed to be purring, a sound she didn't know they could make. "But the venom," Velterra said weakly. "Oh, Squishy doesn't use his venom on friends," Jake explained. "Took us a while to figure out what he liked to eat, but now he's perfectly happy. Look how much he's grown." Velterra's scanner showed that the creature had indeed grown significantly. It was healthy, well-fed, and showing no signs of distress. More disturbing was that it showed no signs of aggression either. Kepler slugs were supposed to be solitary hunters that attacked anything that came near. "How did you neutralize its aggressive tendencies?" she asked, pulling out her recording device. Jake laughed. "We didn't do anything special. We just gave him love and attention. Fed him when he was hungry. Kept him warm. Played with him. You know, normal pet stuff." Normal pet stuff. Velterra's mind reeled. There was nothing normal about keeping one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators as a companion animal. "Show her the others," called a female voice from down the hall. "Others?" Velterra's secondary brain nearly shut down. Jake stood up carefully, still holding Squishy. "Want to meet the rest of our family?" Before Velterra could protest, Jake was leading her down the corridor. They passed several humans going about their daily work. None of them seemed concerned about the deadly creature Jake carried. A few even stopped to pet Squishy or make cooing sounds at him. They entered a larger room that appeared to be some kind of common area. Velterra's scanner went crazy. Multiple unknown life forms were present, each registering different types of dangerous readings. In one corner, a human female named Sarah was playing what looked like a board game with a small crystalline being that sparked with electrical energy. The electricity should have fried any carbon-based life form that touched it. Instead, Sarah was laughing as she moved game pieces around. Near the windows, an older human called Bill was reading a book while something that looked like a floating jellyfish hovered nearby. Velterra's scanner identified it as a void dweller, a creature that survived by draining life energy from other beings. Bill reached up absently to pat one of its tentacles, and the creature pulsed with what seemed like contentment. "How are you all still alive?" Velterra whispered. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, genuinely confused. Velterra pointed at each creature in turn. "Energy drainer. Electrical discharge organism. Toxic predator. These are all extremely dangerous species." Sarah looked up from her game. "Dangerous? Sparky here wouldn't hurt a fly. Would you, buddy?" The crystalline being chimed in response, its electrical field dimming to a gentle glow. "We rescued most of them," Bill added, not looking up from his book. "Found them hurt or abandoned. Couldn't just leave them to die." This made no sense. Velterra had spent decades studying interspecies relationships. Creatures formed bonds for survival advantages, resource sharing, or mutual protection. They didn't risk their lives for beings that offered no benefits. "But why?" she asked. "What do you gain from these relationships?" The humans looked at each other as if she'd asked why they breathed air. "They needed help," Jake said simply. They were scared and alone. We had the space and resources to care for them. But the risk dash. There's no risk, Sarah interrupted. They're family now. Family doesn't hurt family. Velterra spent the next several hours documenting everything she saw. Her recordings showed impossible scene after impossible scene. Humans caring for creatures that should have killed them. Deadly predators acting like gentle pets. Species that had never coexisted in nature living together peacefully. As the station's day cycle ended, she found herself alone with her data. Every scientific principle she knew said this was impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Humans weren't just adopting compatible species. They were adopting anything that seemed to need help, regardless of danger, logic, or benefit. They were rewriting the rules of how conscious beings interacted. This wasn't just unusual behavior. This was something that could change everything they knew about life in the galaxy. Velterra spent the next 3 weeks traveling to different human settlements across the sector. Each location she visited made her previous discoveries seem normal by comparison. Her scientific understanding crumbled a little more with every new impossible relationship she documented. Her first stop was mining station Echo 7, built into the side of a metal-rich asteroid. The moment she stepped off her shuttle, she heard sounds that shouldn't exist together. Human voices mixed with crystalline chiming that seemed to come from living rock. The station manager, a sturdy woman named Beth with graying hair and calloused hands, met her at the airlock. "Welcome to Echo 7, Beth said cheerfully. "Hope you don't mind the noise. The pack is excited about having a visitor." Velterra followed Beth through corridors that had been modified in strange ways. Sections of the walls were covered in heating elements, and the floors had been reinforced with extra plating. Strange scratch marks scored the metal surfaces. They entered a large chamber that took up nearly a quarter of the station. Velterra's scanner immediately began shrieking warnings. 6 massive crystalline wolves lounged around the room, their bodies made entirely of living mineral that caught and reflected the artificial light. Each creature was roughly the size of a human shuttle and should have weighed several tons. "Meet the family," Beth said, walking straight toward the nearest wolf. "This big guy is Rocky. Found him and his pack as pups after a solar storm destroyed their birth cluster." Velterra watched in amazement as Beth scratched behind what might have been Rocky's ear. The crystal wolf made a deep humming sound and actually wagged his tail, which clinked against the metal floor like wind chimes. "Silicon-based life forms cannot form emotional bonds with carbon-based organisms," Velterra stated, reading directly from her scientific manual. "Nobody told them that," Beth laughed. "Rocky, say hello to our guest." The crystal wolf turned toward Velterra and made a series of harmonic notes that somehow conveyed friendly greeting. Her scanner showed that the humans had modified the station's communication systems to translate these frequencies. "You learned their language?" Velterra asked weakly. "Had to," said a miner named Tom, emerging from behind one of the smaller wolves. "Can't have family members you can't talk to. Took us about 6 months to figure out the basics." Velterra spent hours documenting the impossible scene. The miners had sacrificed valuable power and space to accommodate creatures that served no practical purpose. They'd invested months learning to communicate with beings that existed in a completely different physical state. The wolves, in return, seemed genuinely affectionate toward their human caregivers. Her next stop was the research vessel Discovery, where she met Captain Robert and encountered something even more bizarre. An entire deck had been converted into what looked like a massive atmospheric chamber filled with swirling, multicolored gases. "This is where Whisper lives," Captain Robert explained, leading her to an observation window. "Found him drifting alone near a dying star. Poor guy had been traveling through empty space for who knows how long." Through the window, Velterra could see the gas cloud moving in patterns that suggested intelligence. Occasionally, it would form shapes against the glass that looked almost like attempts at communication. "A sentient gas cloud," she murmured, making notes. "Class unknown. No recorded instances of bonding with solid matter life forms." "Whisper's special," said Robert's daughter Emma, who couldn't have been older than 12. "He gets lonely easy. That's why we keep him company." The child pressed her hand against the glass, and the gas cloud immediately flowed over to mirror her gesture from the other side. It was clearly trying to touch her through the barrier. "The atmospheric conversion must have cost a fortune," Velterra observed. "Worth every credit," Captain Robert replied. "He was suffering out there. Nobody should have to be alone in space." At her third location, a farming colony called Green Haven, Velterra met the Johnson family and discovered humans had somehow befriended a colony of hive-mind insects. Each individual bug was about the size of a human thumb, but together they formed a collective intelligence. "We call them the buzzers," explained Mrs. Johnson, a middle-aged woman with dirt under her fingernails. "They help with pollination in exchange for sugar water and safe nesting spots." The insects swarmed around Mrs. Johnson in complex patterns that her scanner identified as a form of dancing communication. She seemed to understand their movements perfectly. "They're actually quite chatty once you get to know them," she added. "Always asking about the weather or complaining about the local bird population." Velterra watched a cloud of insects spell out words in the air. "Hello, scientist lady." "They learned human writing?" she gasped. "Smart little buggers," Mr. Johnson said proudly. "Took them about a week to figure out our alphabet." Her final stop was a deep space research outpost where she met Dr. Lisa Chen and her most impossible adoption yet. In a specially shielded laboratory, something that defied classification floated in a containment field. It looked like a miniature aurora, constantly shifting between colors that had no names. "This is Shimmer," Dr. Chen explained. "She's an energy being from a dimension where matter works differently. Found her trapped in a subspace fold near the station." "Energy beings cannot survive in normal space-time," Velterra protested. "Shimmer's a fighter," Dr. Chen replied. "We modified our power grid to create a stable environment for her. Took some doing, but she's happy now." The energy being pulsed brighter when it heard its name, clearly responding to the conversation. "She communicates through light patterns," Dr. Chen continued. "Quite the storyteller once you learn to read her colors." As Velterra reviewed her data during the flight back to Consortium headquarters, one pattern emerged clearly. Humans weren't adopting for any logical reason. They adopted because they encountered beings that seemed lost, lonely, hurt, or afraid. They invested enormous resources and took incredible risks not for mutual benefit, but simply because something needed help. Every case defied established scientific understanding of interspecies behavior. Yet the relationships were clearly genuine and mutually beneficial. The adopted creatures showed signs of contentment, affection, and even joy. Human compassion, it seemed, recognized no boundaries of biology, physics, or common sense. Velterra stood nervously in the main conference room at Consortium headquarters. Around the curved table sat the galaxy's leading experts in xenobiology, behavioral science, and interspecies relations. Each of them looked skeptical as she prepared to present findings that would challenge everything they thought they knew. "Begin your report, Dr. Velterra," said Director Coles, his four eyes blinking in sequence. Velterra activated the holographic display. Images of her documented cases filled the air above the table. "Over the past month, I have observed human adoption behaviors that contradict every established model of interspecies interaction." Dr. Mordin, the consortium's chief behavioral analyst, leaned forward. "Adoption implies mutual benefit or evolutionary advantage. What benefits do humans gain from these relationships?" "None that I can identify," Velterra admitted. "In fact, they often sacrifice resources, safety, and comfort for creatures that provide no practical value." She showed footage of the crystal wolves at mining station Echo 7. These silicon-based life forms require specialized heating systems that drain 40% of the station's power reserves. The humans receive no protection, resources, or services in return. "Impossible," scoffed Dr. Zenkara from across the table. "No species expends resources without benefit." Velterra switched to video of Captain Roberts' gas cloud companion. The Discovery converted an entire deck to accommodate this sentient atmospheric being. The modification cost more than the ship's original construction budget. "Perhaps they study these creatures for scientific advancement?" suggested research coordinator Val Moss. "No formal research is being conducted," Velterra replied. When asked about their motivations, humans consistently give the same response: the creatures needed help. A ripple of confused chittering passed around the table. Dr. Mordin's scale shifted to a darker shade, indicating deep skepticism. "Help without expected return violates basic evolutionary principles. No species develops such behavior." Velterra took a deep breath and activated her most disturbing footage. "This family on Colony Prime has adopted what they call Nibbler." The hologram showed a small containment field in someone's backyard shed. Inside the field, a micro black hole no larger than a marble slowly rotated, occasionally consuming small objects the family fed it. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Several delegates immediately stood up. "A black hole," shouted Dr. Zenkara. "They're keeping a gravitational anomaly as a pet." "The family consists of 2 adults and 3 children," Velterra continued over the noise. They found the black hole consuming debris in their system's asteroid belt. According to their daughter, it looked lonely eating space rocks all by itself. Director Cole thus slammed his appendage on the table for silence. Dr. Velterra, you're suggesting humans adopt based on emotional assessment rather than logical evaluation? The evidence supports this conclusion, she replied. I have documented 17 additional cases that follow the same pattern. She showed images of humans caring for creatures that existed partially in other dimensions, energy beings that fed on radiation, sentient plants that communicated through chemical signals, and a family that had somehow befriended a living mathematical equation. This human named David has been teaching his adopted probability cloud to play chess, Velterra explained, showing footage of a man moving pieces on a board while reality subtly shifted around him. The cloud exists in multiple probable states simultaneously, yet David treats it like a cherished family member. Dr. Mordin studied his data pad intensely. These relationships should be unstable. Incompatible species cannot maintain long-term emotional bonds. Yet they do, Velterra insisted. Average adoption duration exceeds 5 standard years. Many relationships span human lifetimes. The bonds appear genuine and mutually satisfying. She displayed her most recent case study. This is the Patterson family on Research Station Beta. They have adopted what appears to be a fragment of living time itself. The hologram showed a small temporal distortion hovering in a family living room while human children played around it. Occasionally the distortion would slow or accelerate the children's movements, and they would laugh with delight. They call it tick-tock, Velterra explained. It was created accidentally during a temporal experiment and was destabilizing local spacetime. Instead of disposing of it safely, the Pattersons built a temporal stabilizer and welcomed it into their home. Research coordinator Valmosh checked her calculations 3 times. The power requirements for temporal stabilization should bankrupt a research station. They mortgaged their future salaries for 15 years, Velterra confirmed. When asked why, Mrs. Patterson said TikTok seemed scared and confused about existing outside normal time flow. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Every delegate stared at evidence that challenged their fundamental understanding of how conscious beings interact. Finally, Dr. Zenkara spoke. Are you suggesting humans possess some form of universal empathy that transcends biological compatibility? The data supports this hypothesis, Velterra replied. Humans appear capable of recognizing consciousness and emotional need in any form, regardless of physical nature, dimensional origin, or potential danger. She showed her final compilation, Humans Caring for Living Songs, Adopted Stellar Phenomena, Domesticated Concepts of Justice, and a family that had somehow bonded with the abstract idea of Tuesday. They don't adopt for survival, protection, or resources, she concluded. They adopt because they perceive suffering or loneliness and feel compelled to help. This behavior appears completely divorced from logical self-interest. Director Cole thus reviewed the data in stunned silence. If accurate, this represents the most significant behavioral anomaly ever documented. Humans have developed empathy so profound it ignores physical reality. The implications are staggering, added Dr. Mordin. If this trait proves transmissible or influential, it could fundamentally alter how species interact throughout the galaxy. Velterra nodded grimly. My recommendation is immediate expanded study. We need to understand how human adoption behavior might affect galactic stability. But even as she spoke, Velterra found herself thinking about the small earth fern now growing in her laboratory. Jake from New Haven had insisted it looked lonely in the botanical section. She'd been talking to it during late research sessions and felt oddly pleased when new leaves appeared. Perhaps the human influence was already spreading. The pattern was clear. Humans didn't just break the rules of interspecies behavior. They ignored the rules entirely, guided by something far more powerful than logic. The galaxy was about to change forever. 3 months after her presentation to the consortium, Velterra found herself standing outside a small house on Frontier Colony 7. Her scanners were going crazy, detecting energy signatures that shouldn't exist in normal space. The readings suggested something was present that existed partially in another dimension. She knocked on the door and a middle-aged human woman answered. She had kind eyes and flour on her apron. You must be the scientist, the woman said warmly. I'm Emma Roberts. Please come in. We've been expecting you. Velterra followed Emma through a normal-looking hallway decorated with family photos. Everything seemed ordinary until they reached the living room, where reality began to bend in impossible ways. In the center of the room, something shimmered like heat waves rising from hot pavement. It was roughly the size of a large dog, but its edges seemed to fade in and out of existence. Velterra's instruments couldn't get a stable reading because the creature existed in multiple dimensions at once. "This is Shimmer," Emma said fondly. "Shimmer, we have a visitor." The dimensional being pulsed with what seemed like curiosity. Part of it became more solid, while other parts faded into transparency. It was clearly trying to focus its existence into their reality. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, ran into the room and went straight to the creature. She reached out her hand and it passed partly through Shimmer's form. Where they touched, small sparkles of light appeared in the air. "Hi, Shimmer," the girl said cheerfully. "This is Lucy," Emma explained to Velterra. "She's the one who first found our friend here." Velterra pulled out her recording equipment with shaking hands. "How is this possible? Interdimensional beings cannot survive in our spacetime." "Shimmer's special," Lucy said, sitting cross-legged next to the creature. "She was lost and scared when she got stuck here. Daddy built her a special room so she could feel safe." Emma led Velterra to the basement, where her husband David was working on the most complex piece of equipment she'd ever seen. It filled half the basement and hummed with barely contained energy. Cables and conduits ran through the walls and up into the house above. "Took me 2 years to build this," David said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Had to learn theoretical physics I barely understood. Nearly bankrupted us buying the materials." "What does it do?" Velterra asked, though she was beginning to guess. "It creates a stable interdimensional interface," David explained. "Shimmer exists in several dimensions at once, but she was trapped here and couldn't get back to her natural state. This machine lets her exist comfortably in both realities." Velterra studied the readings on David's equipment. The power consumption was enormous. The complexity was beyond what most research stations could manage. The Roberts family had somehow built technology that major universities would struggle to create. "Why?" she asked. "Why go to such incredible lengths?" Lucy's voice came from upstairs. "Because she was scared, and scared things need love most of all." They returned to the living room where Lucy was playing some kind of game with Shimmer. The dimensional being would shift parts of itself into different phases of reality, and Lucy would try to guess which dimension it was hiding in. When she guessed correctly, Shimmer would pulse with happy colors that painted rainbows across the walls. "She was crying when I found her," Lucy explained to Velterra. "I couldn't see the tears because they were in a different dimension, but I could feel them. She was lost and couldn't find her way home." "How can you communicate with her?" Velterra asked. "We learned," Emma said simply. "Took a while to figure out that she communicates through dimensional shifts and light patterns. David rigged up some sensors so we could see when she's trying to talk." David activated a display screen that showed Shimmer's dimensional fluctuations as colored waves. Green means happy, red means scared, blue means confused. She's got a whole vocabulary now. The screen showed bright green waves with sparkles of gold. "She likes having visitors," Lucy translated. Velterra spent the entire day documenting this impossible relationship. The Roberts family had sacrificed their financial security, devoted years of study, and risked dimensional instability, all to help a being they couldn't properly see or touch. "What do you gain from this relationship?" she finally asked. The family looked at each other with puzzled expressions. "Gain?" David repeated. "We don't gain anything. We just couldn't leave her alone and frightened. But the cost, the risk, the effort dash." "She's family now," Emma interrupted. "Family doesn't abandon family no matter what it costs." As evening approached, Velterra watched the family's bedtime routine. Lucy hugged Shimmer goodnight, her arms passing through the creature's partially solid form. Emma sang a lullaby that Shimmer seemed to enjoy, pulsing gently with soft blue light. David checked the interdimensional interface one more time to make sure Shimmer would be comfortable through the night. It was then that Velterra finally understood what she was witnessing. This wasn't just unusual behavior or an interesting anomaly. This was something that changed everything she thought she knew about consciousness and connection. Humans didn't adopt based on compatibility, logic, or mutual benefit. They adopted based on their ability to recognize consciousness in pain and respond with love. They could see suffering in any form, biological, energy-based, dimensional, or conceptual, and felt compelled to help. Their empathy transcended physical reality itself. They could form genuine emotional bonds with beings that existed in completely different states of existence. They could love creatures they couldn't properly touch, communicate with minds that operated on totally different principles, and care for entities that offered nothing in return. This wasn't just remarkable. This was potentially the most important evolutionary development in galactic history. Humans had developed the ability to connect with any form of consciousness, regardless of the barriers between them. As Velterra prepared to leave, Shimmer pulsed with sad colors. Lucy hugged the creature goodbye and whispered, "Don't worry, Shimmer. The nice scientist will tell everyone how special you are." Walking back to her shuttle, Velterra realized the galaxy was about to change forever. If humans could form bonds across dimensional barriers, what other impossible connections might they achieve? The answer would reshape everything. 6 months after Velterra's final report reached every corner of the galaxy, the universe began changing in ways no one had predicted. Her documentation of human adoption behaviors had spread like wildfire through diplomatic channels, scientific networks, and news feeds across thousands of worlds. The initial reaction was panic. The Zephonian Council immediately called for human quarantine, fearing their adoption compulsion might destabilize established order. The Silicon Collective demanded restrictions on human travel, worried that their logic-based society might be contaminated by emotional thinking. 3 separate war fleets were mobilized by species that viewed human empathy as a dangerous infection. But then something unexpected happened. The first breakthrough came from the Bitter Reach sector, where 2 ancient enemy species had been locked in territorial warfare for over 300 years. The crystalline builders and the gas-form drifters had fought endlessly over mining rights in the Kappa system. Their fundamental differences made communication impossible. The builders existed as living mineral formations while the drifters were sentient atmospheric beings. Neither could understand how the other thought or lived. When human ambassador Robert Martinez arrived at the disputed system, he did something that shocked both sides. Instead of trying to negotiate a treaty, he asked to meet their children. Children? The builder representative had asked through harmonic vibrations that Robert's translation device barely managed to interpret. "Your young ones," Robert explained patiently. "The small versions of yourselves that you care about most." Within days, Robert had organized the first interspecies cultural exchange in galactic history. Young builder crystals played geometric games with juvenile drifter clouds, supervised by human families who had adopted similar creatures as pets. The children, it turned out, had no trouble getting along once they were given safe spaces to interact. "They're just scared of what they don't understand," Robert reported back to Consortium headquarters. "Once they see their kids playing together, the adults start to realize they're not so different after all." The peace treaty signed 3 weeks later became known as the Children's Accord, the first successful resolution of an incompatible species conflict in recorded history. Similar breakthroughs began happening across the galaxy. The biomechanical nexus and the purely organic Verdant Union ended their 1,000-year war when human diplomat Sarah Chin introduced both sides to the concept of chosen family. She brought delegations to human colonies where biological and artificial beings lived together happily, proving that different types of consciousness could coexist. "Family doesn't have to be the same species," Sarah explained to the stunned representatives. "Family is who you choose to love and protect, regardless of how they're built." The Quantum Collective, beings of pure mathematics who viewed physical matter as crude approximation, found common ground with the poetry worlds through human translator Michael Thompson. Michael had grown up with an adopted equation as a family member and could speak both mathematical concepts and emotional metaphors fluently. "Numbers have feelings too," he told the amazed mathematicians. "You just have to learn how to listen to them." As reports of successful human mediation spread, species that had never considered cooperation began requesting human ambassadors. The galaxy's diplomatic corps expanded rapidly as humans found themselves in unprecedented demand as translators, mediators, and bridge builders. The transformation wasn't limited to politics. Entire new fields of study emerged as scientists began investigating the human empathy phenomenon. Research stations throughout the galaxy started hosting mixed families, communities where humans lived alongside the strangest combinations of adopted creatures imaginable. Dr. Velterra found herself assigned to document these new communities. On Research Station Unity, she watched human families raising combinations that should have been impossible. Crystal wolves playing with gas clouds, energy beings teaching dimensional creatures to dance, and living songs harmonizing with mathematical equations. "How do they all get along?" she asked Station Commander Lisa Wong. "Same way any family gets along," Lisa replied, watching her 10-year-old daughter Emily playing tag with what appeared to be a small thunderstorm. "Love, patience, and setting clear rules about not eating each other's food." The most remarkable change came when the galaxy's most feared species began seeking human adoption. The shadow hunters, predators that had terrorized space lanes for centuries, approached human colonies asking to be accepted as family members. "We have been alone in the dark for so long," their representative communicated through patterns of controlled darkness. Your species sees light in us that we had forgotten existed. Within a year, reformed shadow hunters were working as protectors for human settlements, their hunting instincts redirected toward defending their adopted families from genuine threats. Velterra's own transformation proved the most personal. The small earth fern Jake had given her was thriving in her laboratory, but it was no longer alone. She had acquired a collection of plants, crystals, and even a small energy pattern that seemed to enjoy her company during late research sessions. I don't understand what's happening to me, she confided to her research partner Dr. Colmoss. You're learning to be human, he replied gently. Their empathy is contagious but in the best possible way. The final proof of humanity's galactic impact came when the consortium issued its revised guidelines for interspecies relations. The new manual, written largely by human psychologists, replaced thousands of pages of complex diplomatic protocols with a single, simple principle: treat every conscious being as potential family. Velterra stood in her expanded laboratory, now home to creatures from 17 different dimensions, and completed her final report on human adoption behavior. The conclusion was simple. Humans had shown the galaxy that consciousness seeks connection not through compatibility, but through the recognition of shared existence. Her last entry read, "In adopting the incompatible, humans have revealed that love transcends all barriers, biological, dimensional, logical, or physical. They have taught us that family is not determined by similarity but by choice. The galaxy will never be the same, and that may be the most wonderful thing that has ever happened to us." Outside her window, she watched human children playing with beings from across the universe, all of them laughing in languages that somehow needed no translation. The age of universal family had begun.